The first time Baron Hartley stepped into Samuel's workshop, he did not knock. Men like him never did. The door swung open with a sound that cut through the rhythm of the plane scraping wood, and Samuel's hands paused mid-stroke just for a breath. Then they continued, slow and deliberate, shaving curls of pine that fell like autumn leaves to the dust-covered floor. Hartley stood in the doorway, sunlight framing his silhouette in harsh gold. His boots were polished. His coat was tailored from St. Louis fabric. His hat bore no sweat stains. Everything about him screamed permanence, ownership, the kind of wealth that made lesser men bow. Samuel did not look up. The workshop smelled of cedar and linseed oil, of sawdust and something older, something patient. Coffins lined the walls in various stages of completion. Some were raw pine, others varnished to a mirror shine. Each one bore the marks of Samuel's hands. Smooth corners, joints so tight they needed no nails, wood that seemed to breathe even in death. Hartley's gaze swept the room with the casual disdain of a man surveying livestock. His lip curled. "You're the carpenter," he said, not a question. Samuel sat down the plane. He was old, maybe 60, maybe 70. His hair was the color of winter ash. His hands gnarled like oak roots, scarred from decades of splinters and blade slips. His eyes, though they were steady, unblinking, the kind of eyes that had measured too many bodies to be surprised by the living. "I am," Samuel said. His voice was low, rough as bark. Hartley stepped inside uninvited. He ran a finger along the edge of an unfinished coffin, inspected it, then wiped his hand on his coat as if the wood had soiled him. "My son is getting married," Hartley said. 3 months from now I need chairs. 20 of them carved, beautiful, the kind that make people remember who sits in them. Samuel's expression did not change. "I make coffins." Hartley laughed. It was a short, sharp sound like a dog's bark. "You work wood, don't you? A chair is just a box you sit in. You've been building boxes for corpses your whole life. Surely you can manage something for the living." Samuel reached for a cloth, wiped the sawdust from his hands. He did not speak. Hartley's smile thinned. "Pay double your usual rate. I assume dead men don't haggle much." He pulled a leather purse from his coat, dropped it on the workbench. The coins inside clinked heavily. "Half now, half on delivery." Samuel looked at the purse, then at Hartley. "I make coffins," he repeated. Hartley's jaw tightened. His hand hovered near the purse, fingers flexing. For a moment the room held its breath. Even the dust moes seemed to freeze midair. Then Hartley grabbed the purse, shoved it back into his coat. "Fine, I'll find someone who understands opportunity." He turned to leave but paused at the door. His voice dropped, colder now. "You're just an old man who builds boxes for the dead. Don't pretend you're anything more." The door slammed shut. The workshop trembled. A thin line of dust drifted down from the rafters. Samuel stood in the silence that followed, his hands resting on the workbench. He looked at the coffin he had been smoothing, ran his palm along its surface. The wood was warm. It always was, even hours after he stopped working, as if it remembered the tree it had been. He picked up the plane and continued his work. The wedding was the talk of the territory. Hartley spared no expense. He imported a minister from Denver, hired a string quartet from Kansas City, and had the reception hall built specifically for the occasion, draped in silk that shimmered like water under candlelight. The chairs he commissioned were masterpieces. Mahogany imported, carved by a furniture maker who charged more for a single chair than most men earned in a year. Each one bore the Hartley family crest inlaid with ivory. Samuel heard about it. Of course, news traveled in small towns like wind through canyon walls, picking up echoes, growing louder. He heard how H. Hartley had stood on the steps of the new hall and declared, "This is what real craftsmanship looks like, not the work of gravediggers and corpse measurers." Samuel kept working. 6 months after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning that began like any other, a rider came into town at full gallop. The horse was elvered, its eyes wild. The rider, a ranch hand from the Hartley estate, was shouting before he even dismounted, "Doc, someone get the doc." By the time Dr. Brennan arrived at the Hartley ranch, it was too late. Young Thomas Hartley, the golden son, the heir, the groom who had sat in those mahogany chairs, lay in the dirt with his neck broken. His horse stood nearby, trembling. A gopher hole 10 yards back, marking the spot where everything had ended. Baron Hartley did not cry, not at first. He stood over his son's body as the ranch hands lifted it onto a wagon, his face carved from stone. His hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. It was only later, in the silence of his study, that the sound came. Low animal, the kind of grief that has no words. 3 days later, Hartley walked into Samuel's workshop. This time he knocked. Samuel opened the door. He wore the same canvas apron, the same sawdust in his hair. His expression had not changed. If he recognized Hartley, he gave no sign. "I need a coffin," Hartley said. His voice was hollow. The words barely made it past his throat. Samuel nodded once, stepped aside. Hartley entered. The workshop looked exactly as it had 6 months ago. The same smell, the same light slanting through gaps in the wall, the same coffins in various stages of completion. But now to Hartley it felt different, smaller. The walls pressed in. The air was too thick. Samuel gestured to a coffin near the back wall. It was finished, varnished. The wood was a deep honey color, smooth as glass. The joints were invisible. The corners were rounded, gentle. It looked almost soft. Hartley stepped closer. His breath caught. He recognized the wood mahogany. The same mahogany he had imported for the wedding chairs. The same grain pattern, the same warm glow under the varnish. And carved along the lid, subtle but unmistakable, were the same scrollwork patterns that had adorned the chairs, the same delicate leaves, the same curving vines. Hartley's hand trembled as he reached out, touched the surface. "This." Samuel stood beside him, hands folded in front of his apron. "You made this from my chairs," Hartley whispered. Samuel said nothing. Hartley's face twisted. Anger flared in his chest, hot and desperate, something to burn away the grief. "You had no right." They were for the wedding. "They were yours," Samuel said quietly. "You never paid for them." Hartley froze. "The furniture maker delivered them." Samuel continued, his voice even unhurried. "But when you saw the bill you refused to pay, said they were overpriced, said you'd settle the account later. You never did." Hartley's mouth opened, but no words came. "6 weeks ago the maker came to collect. You had him thrown off your property, so he sold the chairs to me for scrap price." The room tilted. Hartley gripped the edge of the coffin to steady himself. I was going to." "The wood remembers," Samuel said. He placed his palm on the coffin lid, the same gesture Hartley had seen him make 100 times before. "It doesn't care what you call it. Chair, coffin, box. It knows what it holds." Hartley stared at the coffin, at the wood that had been meant to seat guests at his son's wedding. Wood that now would cradle his son's body into the earth. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the workbench, gasping. "Please," he choked. "Please, I'll pay anything. Just make another one. Something else, not this." Samuel shook his head slowly. "This is the one." "Why?" The word tore out of Hartley like a scream. "Why would you do this?" Samuel met his eyes for the first time. There was no cruelty in his gaze, no satisfaction, just something old and immovable, like stone worn smooth by water. "You asked me to make chairs for the living," he said. "I told you I make coffins." The wood knew before either of us did. Hartley collapsed onto a stool, his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. The grief that had been building for 3 days finally broke through, raw and unstoppable. Samuel turned away, gave him space. He walked to the workbench, picked up his tools, and began cleaning them with the same slow, methodical care he gave everything. When Hartley finally raised his head, his eyes were red, his face haggard. "How much?" he rasped. Samuel set down the cloth he'd been using. "Nothing." Hartley blinked. "What? I don't take payment for this one, but you said it yourself once." Samuel's voice was soft, almost kind. "Dead men don't haggle." The funeral was held on a gray morning. The coffin was carried by 6 men, but it felt light in their hands. Too light, as if the mahogany had given up its weight, surrendered its density to hold something more fragile. Baron Hartley stood at the graveside, staring at the coffin as it was lowered into the earth. He did not hear the minister's words. He did not see the mourners. All he saw was the scrollwork on the lid, the same pattern that had been carved to celebrate a beginning, now marking an end. After the service, people came to offer condolences. They shook his hand. They murmured empty comforts. He nodded, said nothing. Only one man did not approach. Samuel stood at the edge of the cemetery, half hidden by a cottonwood tree. He wore a clean shirt, no apron. His hat was in his hands. He did not look at the grave. He looked at the sky. When everyone had left, when even the gravediggers had finished their work and gone, Hartley walked to where Samuel stood. For a long time neither spoke. Then Hartley said, "I'm sorry." Samuel nodded once. "I know." Hartley's throat worked. He wanted to say more, wanted to explain, to justify, to make sense of the senseless. But the words tangled in his chest, too heavy to lift. Samuel placed his hat back on his head, turned to leave. "Will you?" Hartley's voice cracked. "Will you make mine?" Samuel stopped. He looked back, and for the first time something almost like warmth touched his eyes. "When the time comes," he said, "I'll know." 20 years passed. Baron Hartley never spoke Samuel's name again, but he never forgot the weight of that mahogany coffin, the way it had absorbed his son and his pride in the same breath. He grew old quietly, his empire crumbling around him like dry leaves. The ranch was sold. The grand house fell into disrepair. The wedding hall burned down one winter, the silk curtains feeding the flames like they'd been waiting for permission. When Hartley died alone in a rented room above the general store, there was no family to claim him, no fortune to distribute, just a body and a name that fewer and fewer people remembered. The undertaker, a young man new to the territory, went to the only carpenter he knew. Samuel's workshop was still there, though Samuel was not. The old man had died 2 winters prior, his hands finally still. His tools hung neatly on the wall like a finished prayer. But inside, leaning against the back wall, was a coffin, plain pine, unvarnished. The joints visible, honest, no ornamentation, no scroll work, just wood. Attached to it was a note written in Samuel's careful hand for Hartley. "When the time comes." The undertaker frowned, checked the records. Baron Hartley had no account with Samuel, no prepaid arrangements, nothing. But the coffin fit perfectly. They buried Hartley in the same cemetery where his son lay. No service, no mourners, just the gravediggers and the wind. As the first shovel of dirt hit the pine lid, it made a sound like a sigh, like the wood finally was letting go of something it had carried for too long. And if you walk through that cemetery today, past the crumbling headstones and weathered crosses, you might notice something strange. 2 graves side by side, one with a marble marker, ornate and cracked. Beneath it, mahogany. One with no marker at all. Beneath it, pine. And carved into the cottonwood tree that stands between them, barely visible under decades of bark growth, are 5 words. "The wood always knows first."